Hello and welcome to the F2 show. I'm your host Fraser Ford. I'm joined today by Inside F2 editor LA Wilshaw, Drive Tribe's Timo Albers Daly, and GP Grandstand's Jim Kimberley. Coming up on the show, rain meant a reduced schedule in Formula 2 this weekend. We review all of the action from the two races that did take place. We take a look at how this weekend's results impact on the championship standings going into the final two rounds of the season. And finally, Formula 2 announced a change in race format for 2022 on Friday. We discuss the changes and how they impact on the series. Lots to talk about then, LA. A bit of a disruptive weekend, as we said, because of the weather, but a fascinating weekend nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit boring, obviously, because of the wait and because of the postponement. I think we were all sat at home, hoping and praying that the rain would let up. And obviously a race would go ahead, but it didn't. And so we saw the the cancellation of the second sprint race. And obviously sprint race one went ahead as usual, much later in the day. But everybody was a bit bored, and the drivers too. And they did a cheeky little round table, three of them, just, I suppose, to kill a little bit of time and, give opportunity as well, seeing as we were deprived of a race and we hadn't had any kind of qualifying press conference the day before either, because of the Formula 3 was shifted around. So it was kind of nice to still catch up with some of the drivers around that time and help them kill a bit of time as well.
Yeah, and Timo, welcome to the show. First time we've obviously had you with us. Oscar Piastri extended his championship lead. How impressed have you been, not only with the job that he's done this weekend, but also the job that he's done all season long?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all. Great to be here. And he's kind of, I was going to say, he's kind of had a little bit slow start to the season, but since Silverstone, he's kind of been on the up and up, and a bit unfortunate in the one sprint race we did get. It was a great opportunity for him to extend the gap to go even more. Especially with Joe not doing too well, not even making it to the start of the race on that one. But in the feature race, he did exactly what he had to, and he seems to be the man to beat, and it's now his championship to lose, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 poles in a row, which is, unbelievable, bearing in mind.
Exclusive club, that one now, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Didn't get a single pole position last year, so it's really turned that around since Formula 3. And Rosanna Tennant asked in commentary if this is a pivotal point in the championship. Alex Brundle reckons so. Jim, what do you reckon?
I don't want to say Rosanna's potentially wrong or Alex is wrong, but I think the pivotal moment came actually way, way back in Bahrain when Piastri showed he was actually going to be the Prema number one, not Schwartzman. I think that's actually the pivotal moment, which has swung things his way. For something a bit further on that, it's Silverstone when he took the reins of the championship, then goes into another extended break. I think we'll have 4 summer breaks this season. But that, I think he's got comfortable with that being at the top. He's not shown that he's intimidated by any of these F2 drivers, and he's just continued to excel. So I don't think it's actually a pivotal moment. I think it's just more of the momentum that he's shown since way back in Bahrain. He's not going to let up. He's not going to bottle it. And yeah, I think the championship's his to lose at this point. But a pivotal moment this time around, I don't think so. It's just more Piastri being Piastri.
Yeah, a brilliant weekend from him. Consistent as always. On the other hand, a bit of a disappointing weekend for Guan Yu Zhou. 29 points scored by Oscar Piastri this weekend. 28 for Teo Pourchaire, 25 for Dan Tixon, 22 for Schwartzman, only 8 for Guan Yu Zhou. He's the big loser, unfortunately, this weekend, LA, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. I don't know if he's cracking under the pressure or if he already knows he's got a drive next season, and does it really matter what happens this season? I mean, that's probably quite flippant of me to put it that way. I'm sure he's a racing driver at the end of the day, and I'm sure he wants to win absolutely everything that he drives in. But you can't help but wonder why, he's making these mistakes. And it was a very messy race, as the commentators did say themselves, during the feature race. To go from qualifying in P4 P4 all the way, sort of he dropped down and down and down, but ended up P6, which, still isn't a terrible place to finish. But if you're fighting for the championship and your main rival is winning races and doing incredibly well across the whole weekend, then you need to pick your game up. And obviously in the sprint race the day before, he spun, and we know it was such tricky conditions, and we know the track was damp and slippery. But this is a young boy that's potentially about to go into Formula One. And so those kind of mistakes, in a way, forgive me for being blunt, but, rookie mistake, he's at the standard and level where I feel like he should at least be making it to the start grid.
Yeah. It's a spin on the way to the grid, as you say. Had he got away with one a little bit, Timo, in terms of, Piastri didn't score points in that race. There was no second race, which obviously Zhou would have started from the back of the grid in that second sprint race. Piastri would have started from P9. Points were potentially available. Zhou got away with one a little bit there?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I mean, like I said before, Piastri didn't take the opportunity to, in the sprint race, to extend the gap in the championship even further, and Zhou's very lucky on that one. And again, it's like Ali said, like, it's a rookie mistake. But with a driver like him, he really shouldn't be making those kind of mistakes at this point, especially if, we don't know at this point, if he does know he's already got a drive for next year in F1, he really shouldn't be making those mistakes, because he should be then proving that he deserves that seat. And I mean, we look at F1, Bottas gets a new contract and he starts doing really well again. He should be doing this kind of thing, and now that it should be fueling him to keep going and doing better. And it's really, like you say, 8 points, and that is potentially, if you look at it, a good weekend in comparison to what it could have been like if there had been a second sprint race. Just not good enough.
You could even argue, Jim, that, because of the cancelled sprint race 2, bearing in mind, again, Schwartzman would have started the race in P6, Dan Tixon P8, Teo Pourchaire would have been from P4, I think. He could have actually lost places in the championship to those 3 guys, or they definitely would have closed the gap to him as well. His P2 could have been under threat, couldn't it?
Yeah, I still think it could be under threat from going forwards from here. He's certainly not looking as in control as he was from round 1. It's a weird mistake, wasn't it? Djokovic, a lot more dramatic, careering into the wall, but Zhou, he could have recovered it, but then he couldn't keep the car running. And that's a Formula 2 kind of quirk that we've seen plenty of drivers do it. So it's difficult to say. And I don't want to really say rookie mistake, because it's happened to the best of the drivers, throughout. I mean, we saw Verstappen at Hungary last year go off into the wall in a bit of damp conditions. It does happen. And it creates great racing in Formula 1. In this case, with Zhou, it wasn't so great because he couldn't even race. In terms of fortune, absolutely, because that would have been a starting from the back of the grid in a sprint race and even more points for everybody else. So that is very fortunate. But I don't want to say that the point situation is insurmountable, especially watching Formula 3 and Trident doing so well against Prema in one individual race, one single race. But Zhou's either knows something we don't know, or he's taking his foot off the gas or something. Third season in Formula 2, and I hoped he would have hoped that he'd been a bit further forwards up the grid, up the table, should I say? But yeah, fortunate that there wasn't another sprint race. But just an odd weekend, one to forget a little bit for him. Made it a bit back in the feature race at least, but yeah, one to forget.
Yeah, it was, and it's a shame for him because he's been brilliant all season long. As you say, Felipe Drugovich, first of all, we're glad that he's okay, and secondly, we wish him all the best and hope to see him again in Jeddah. And you picked up there on Trident as well, Formula 3. Massive well done to Trident for their constructors win in Formula 3, and Dennis Hauger, of course, who we look forward to seeing in Formula 2 next season. If this is a question for yourself, Jim, if Guan Yu Zhou does have the Alfa Romeo contract signed, like you guys have essentially alluded to, and presumably that would mean he's going to Alfa Romeo and he won't be part of the Alpine Academy for the rest of the season. Does that mean he would drive or race in a UNI Virtuosi livery for the last 2 rounds of the season, or do you think he'll still race in that Alpine livery, or could he stay part of Alpine's Academy until the end of the season? How would that work? Do you know?
don't have an idea, to be honest. I think the livery is one of the better ones as well, so it'd be a shame to see it go. We've seen with Dragocic's livery, though, that it's certainly possible to go something like it, but I'd wonder then would Virtuosi need to change both their cars because they both have echoes of the Alpine livery. But with the contract stuff, I don't know. It's not going to be the case until your contract actually starts, which will be after the season, so theoretically there'd be no problems with it. I know Albon's going through a similar thing at the moment with his Williams drive. So I don't think if Joe has got that drive and whatever this contract situation that's been speculated about, him being unhappy with a 1-year deal has got sorted, whatever that might be, I don't think he'll particularly care. He's going to Formula One no matter what, if that is, if the rumours are true, if that is what's going to happen. So I don't know. It doesn't matter what colour paint is on his car, if that's the case. I would feel devastated for Piastri that he's not going to make the step up. That's a bigger problem for me. But yeah, if Joe does make the step up, very interested to see how he does.
Yeah, definitely. We'll look forward to, hearing that announcement potentially or probably before the next time we're racing Formula 2. So we'll wait and see. Let's talk about some of the guys that are putting pressure on him in the championship. LA, I know you're pretty desperate to have a word on Dan Ticktum. Go for it. Obviously, winner of the sprint race 1. Brilliant weekend from him.
Yeah, I don't know about the word desperate Dan, but that's an old school thing if nobody knows what that is.
I know desperate Dan, don't worry.
Yeah, because we're old. No, but I mean, I know we all laugh, but I can see, I've been watching motor racing for majority of my life, and I can really see the potential in this young man, and I feel a little bit devastated that things haven't gone his way for whatever the reasons are, and so I really sort of felt this season I wanted to get behind him and champion him a little bit, because I maybe it's because I've been from a similar what does it say, cut from the same cloth, is that the saying? I may have got myself into a bit of bother in the past myself, through this thing here, but so maybe I can associate with him a little bit, and I always feel that this shouldn't say anything about you. His driving is outstanding. We've seen that, in the toughest of situations, when he's put under pressure, this guy can not necessarily produce the results as in, come first and wow everybody, but as in claw back places that in a way he's got no right clawing back. So this weekend started off a bit tough for him. He didn't do that well in practice, and he qualified in 10th, which isn't necessarily the best place for the feature race, and he knows feature races are more important because they are worth more points. So, I don't necessarily agree with qualifying in 10th so you can start a sprint race in first and then, get sprint race points, because at the end of the day, the drivers need the feature race points. So he started in first place in the sprint race, as we know, reverse pole. But what was impressive was during all of those conditions, when there were drivers spinning out and there were drivers touching the damp and crashing or, whatever was happening, he kept his head, he kept it together, he kept it on the track. And you could argue at the beginning he might have been lucky because they were all trying to stick to this drying line. The rest of the track was damp. Who's going to attempt an overtake on that initially? But he made a big distance in that first race, and I think he definitely deserved the win on Saturday. And then he went from P10 to P5 in the feature race, again, doing, some incredible overtakes. He delayed his pit stop a little bit, stayed out, got to P3. And then on the outside of Joe, got the P2 off him, snatched it off him, another title contender. Just, I don't know. I'm really impressed by his driving, by him, and he doesn't know where he's going to be next year, which is the real shame for motorsport, because I feel that somebody who is quite very passionate the way he is, that can be honed with the right team around him, with the right people around him. There's many Formula One drivers, including Max, who I know he goes off on one occasionally himself, but I'm sure there's still people around him that hone that and point that passion in the right direction, so he can then keep it on the track, prove the results on the track. And I feel that Dan is a very similar breed to those kind of drivers, that deserves a place for me personally in F1. I hope he gets there. If he has to take a year out, or if he does another year in F2, or if he goes to IndyCar for a year, I want him to come back and I want him to get into F1.
Yeah, that LA might have some sort of fan of, or I feel like he might be some sort of fan of Dan Ticktum. But I think the thing that I wanted to bring up with his win this weekend, another one, was he looked in control, didn't he, the entire time? And you could say it's easy to win from the front, but he said after the race, on the radio, that it's one of the more difficult races he's ever raced. And he gave no sense of that during watching the race. So as we watched it, he just looked like he was in control, had no point that he might lose it, might spin off the track or anything. And he really cruised to a victory. And we see that some of the names you mentioned, like Verstappen, they've done that how many times? And then they come out and say, oh, that's a really difficult race. We're thinking, was it? You looked in control. So Dan's definitely got something. It will be a shame that he is all likely not going to make it to Formula One. But wherever he does end up, I can't wait to hear his team radio, and whatever team do home him, they'll be having a bit of a superstar on their hands.
He's got the pace, isn't he? There's no doubt about that. On the podium every single round this season. So, brilliant from Dan Ticktum. Was he a little bit lucky, Timo, that not lucky, but, potentially a little bit fortunate that, the first sprint race, it started from the safety car, or under the safety car, obviously was a rolling start. He wasn't as vulnerable as he perhaps would have been from a standing start. And could it have been a standing start, Timo?
I think it could have been. It didn't. I mean, again, it's tricky to know for certain because obviously we're not there on the ground. Unfortunately, we can't measure it. But I feel like it could have been a standing start. It didn't look too bad if you compare it to other portions of the weekend. And again, it's not a guarantee, as we've seen today in F1, that you're going to win from pole. So I think he might still have gotten the race win, but it might have been at least for us visually trickier for him to do so. But again, he showed in the feature race that he's still, like Ellie's saying, making up places that he theoretically doesn't have any right to do. So it's one of the things when he's good, he is there in the driving sense. So I think it's just one of the things where maybe there was a bit of luck to it this weekend with the rolling start, but at the same time, he just seemed to be, after getting all of his kind of mistakes, shall we say, out of the way in practice and qualifying, maybe not having that second sprint race gave him a bit more time to kind of think things through a bit and just calm down and be a bit more level-headed. Because I think if he had that more generally, then he might be getting attention from other teams and his path might have been easier. Because again, when he does have the lid down, love him or hate him, he does drive decently. So, and you can't really deny that. So I think it's just one of the things where we're not going to know, but I think there was nothing going to stop him necessarily this weekend bar something mechanical.
Yeah, that move around the outside of Guan Yu Zhou was something quite special, wasn't it? I don't think they quite picked up on it. There was no replays of it, I don't think, but it was something quite special. LA, as we said, Robert Schwartzman, home weekend and a home podium this weekend. He closes the gap to Guan Yu Zhou to 7 points. If we're saying that Guan Yu Zhou is a title contender, Robert Schwartzman is well and truly still in the mix, isn't he?
Yes, for sure, absolutely. And I we watched last year's, where the title went down to the wire. And if you look at previous years, it seems to do it more frequently than anything else. It always seems to have landed on the final race weekend, and I think it would probably go down to the final race weekend again. We're only two away from that now. Yes, it's possible, for him to creep up and creep into the points. It happened with Schumacher last year. He sort of seemed to be nowhere for however long, and then suddenly after some good moves, some good starts, he started to pull the points in. And Schwartzman is, I think he sort of mentioned a few weeks ago that he didn't say he's not ready to go into F1. Those aren't the words he used, but the words he used were about, utilising his time in F2 again next season. So in his mind, I think he's settled into repeating another year again, a third year in Formula 2, and learning and being a part of the team he's with and helping to develop that team. And I think it'd probably be difficult for him now if he went to another series. So if he won this championship this year, he's been with the Ferrari Driver Academy, he's been with the Prema team, his career, his racing career. So for him to win and then go somewhere completely different, I sometimes think that could be detrimental to a driver's career rather than help it. So of course you want him to win. I love Robert Schwartzman. He was my dark horse last year, but this year, because there's probably no place for him in F1, I don't want him to win.
There you go. LA, as I put it like that, exactly that. No, that's fair enough. Yeah, it's Robert Schwartzman. We know how good he is, and he potentially has maybe been a little bit shocked at how Oscar Piastri has outshone him. Let's be honest, outshone him this season, and I'm sure he will learn and come back next season. Potentially have Dennis Hauger as a teammate at Prema. Let's wait and see. Teo Pourchaire, another brilliant weekend. Said actually pre-feature race that he wanted to take points away from Oscar Piastri. So he clearly still thinks he can win the title. Is he a title contender, Timo?
It's a tricky one because mathematically possible, of course, and it's F2. You can't rule it out at the end of the day. But I think something would have to seriously go wrong for Piastri for it to happen. Personally, I think that it's going to be between the three drivers we've said about so far, Piastri, Joe and Schwartzman. Again, it's awkward who we want to win there because of what's available, and it's annoying that we have to think like that, but that's a whole other discussion. Pourchaire, I think it would be a bit like Nick from F3 into F2, take a couple seasons to do it, because I think if the battle this year is between those three drivers, next year I think if the momentum is carried forward, could be Pourchaire Hauger kind of battle next year, and that could be quite interesting to see because like Piastri, Pourchaire has just brought through that momentum from his F3 season last year, where he got very close again. It went down to the final round, but he just wasn't quite there. But I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think he'll be very close to it. And I think that'll then fuel him to do it for next year. And I think, he's been linked to Alfa Romeo as well. And I think if he's not in that car next to Bottas in 2023, then I'll be surprised.
Yeah, I agree with you in a way. I think for Teo, it's he's probably got this seat not next year, the year after in Formula One. But I also think what you have to look at is the consistency of the other four drivers ahead of him in the championship, because all four, three now, Guan Yu Zhou didn't do it this weekend, but Piastri, Schwartzman and Ticktum all have been on the podium in every race weekend this season. Joe was up there too up until this weekend that's just gone. And the consistency of those three now, I'm not sure Pourchaire can actually those stats speak for themselves, and at least one of the three of them are going to finish on the podium in the next two race weekends as well, just because of the way it's gone this season. So Pourchaire probably doesn't have a chance at all this season whatsoever. And again, he doesn't need to, maybe not have a championship, but then he goes off on a tangent somewhere, and then maybe it's good. Maybe it'd be good though, right? If you think about it, if he's pretty much guaranteed an F1 seat in 2 years, then let somebody like that win this championship, go off for a year, because we will see them again in a couple of years. Whereas I'm really afraid of losing some incredible drivers, because I don't watch every series in the world. I don't watch IndyCar, I don't watch DTM. I don't want to lose some of these drivers that I've got to know and like and support. I want to see Schwartzman, I want to see Ticktum next season, and I want to be watching them. So don't win the championship.
I think he's definitely going to spoil the party for the other three drivers. It's just maybe whoever wins will have to thank him in part for ruining it for the other two.
Teo Porchera, he has a bit of time, doesn't he? So I'm sure he won't be too worried about this season. Jim, let's talk about it. Your boy Ralph Boschung, obviously president of the Ralph Boschung fan club, unofficially, of course. Actually, before we talk about that, obviously we open the guys up to you guys at home. So any questions that you have before the show, we put them on social media, on our Instagram, on our Twitter. And Jim actually messaged Inside F2 on Instagram, and he asked, if Boschung hadn't have locked up, would he have won the race? Jim, I'm not sure he would have won the race. He was quite a bit behind. I'm going to swing that to you. Would he have won the race in your opinion? And he was guaranteed. Well, I don't know about guaranteed, but he was well on track for a podium with five laps to go, wasn't he? So it's such a shame to see how it ended for him.
I stopped watching with about 8 laps to go. Was there something happen? No, I'm with Norris and Ralph on the same day. I'm actually amazed I was able to stop crying to come on the podcast. It's been a hell of a roller coaster. He was great though, wasn't he? A grin. He's put that Campos into terrific positions all season long, and he's gaining his P5, P6s, and was looking odds on to get that podium. But he had the same problem he had on the Sprint Race 1, where he locked up repeatedly on Sprint Race 1 as well, but somehow managed to keep his position. Very impressive as well, the rare double front tyre lock-up, cloud of smoke, and continuing on in Sprint Race 1. And he thought he could get away with it in the feature race, but no, that tyre carcass said quite a lot, didn't it? Bless him. But I don't know what his big news is going to be. That, like I say, it should be the Mercedes drive, right? That's most likely. But with George Russell trying to hamper those plans, I don't know if he's doing a season in F2 or Indy or what. But I think he's really shown this year in the campus, which, let's face it, isn't on the same level as a UNI Virtuosi or a Prema, that he's a very capable driver. He's not going to make it to Formula One, and I accept that fact. But he's put still a performance in throughout the season, a particularly stellar one this time round, and I really hoped that I could have seen him on the podium, but it wasn't to be. I was devastated when Jehan got past him. But maybe next time. We've still got 6 races to go, so this season, Campos on the podium with Ralph Boschung. Who knows?
I think his race engineer said it pretty much when we were waiting for the first sprint race to get going. You can get pole in Abu Dhabi and then it'll start raining. That's his kind of luck this year.
It really is, isn't it? Let's hope so, because I think everyone's a fan of Ralph Boschung, aren't they? So let's wait and see. Okay, let's move on then. Formula 2 announced a change to the race format for 2022 on Friday. Good news, Jim? Yeah,
absolutely. Unquestionably, I think, in particular as a Formula 2 fan, on the Inside F2 podcast, the F2 show, so we have to focus on the F2 element of it. Formula 3 didn't feel so bad this year because it's a lot more compressed. So I don't know, we're used to having fewer Formula 3 race weekends anyway, but Formula 2 has been very difficult to not follow. I know what happened, but to feel the momentum this time around. It's very stop-start. Here's a couple of weekends. I'm going to stop for a couple of months like we're about to. So reverting back is terrific. I'm impressed that they went with the gamble, I suppose, of trying this different format, and I think we should commend the showrunners for doing so. That's something that's it's a big decision to do. We're going to split the series off from their small brother and the little brother, and do 3 races per weekend. It didn't work, and that's fine. But it's good that they gave it a shot. The question I think is more interesting would be, would it have worked if they stuck to European races? So we'd bet the season finale around now. We would have seen some other Formula 2 drivers make it into Formula 1 next year because of the way the season panned out, that by the time the Italian race had come, we weren't at the halfway point in the season. But at the same time, I'm glad they're not doing it that way, because Formula 3 is over before it even starts, it feels like sometimes. So with this being Formula 2 and going back to 12 race weekends, really interested to see what the calendar will be, and also make sure they're going to be on some better tracks than they've had this year. Not to poo-poo on Monaco or Sochi, and we'll see what Jeddah is going to turn out to be like. And Yas Marina's got its new layout, its new bankings and whatnot. but the Formula 3 calendars had it beat hands down. So having more races should be terrific again. So very glad that they're going back to the classic format.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to that next season. LA, I know Jim's obviously said, maybe not an all European calendar, but obviously Michael Massey has said that the new format reinforces the pathway to Formula One. Does that suggest that we could have more races earlier on in the season to potentially give, at least have 8 or 9 rounds completed by the time we get to the likes of, the summer break and the likes of Spa, Monza, so that when Formula 1 teams, when they're making those decisions, then Formula 2 drivers have had 9 rounds to prove themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I think that they'll put the races on, as early on as they can, begin them at the beginning of the Formula One season anyway. And I think the phrase they use is wherever possible. It's about keeping Formula 2 and Formula 3 together again. Don't forget, it's about, and they're calling it the pyramid, of Formula 1, Formula 2 and Formula 3 all together exactly where it should be. And I mean, you can sort of read between the lines, and this is why we're here. This is why we have these podcasts, to have these discussions of why, not only necessarily for Formula 1 teams to have these drivers coming through and being available for them, but also not and for the spectators, for them to get into the momentum of these support series, and get into the mentality that they're just, they're important to support and to get behind, and to know who these drivers are by the time they get to Formula One. Not just, you see it yourself. We know who these guys are because we're all involved in the industry, but you see it on social media where only Formula One fans don't really know much about these drivers. They don't know who they are. They don't know what the history is. And it would be nice for everybody to have the bigger picture, and for everybody to kind of know who at least some of them are, or most of them are. There were prejudgments coming in about Mick Schumacher because of his name. And that was so unfair, because if you'd have watched last season, you'd have seen that he absolutely deserved that championship. And some of those overtakes that he made, was it Monza when he made up the 10, 11 positions, P2 by the first turn, incredible racing. Of course he deserves that seat, not just because of his name. So Michael Massey said within his statements, complimenting, which is what you've just said, about Bruno Michel's team bringing the F2 and F3 together, even across the years, showcasing them to all the Formula One teams, having a shared billing that showcases all 3 of them at the same events, and it would be beneficial to both competitors and spectators. But what I found interesting, let me see if I can just find the quote. This is the one from Stefano Domenicali, who said, we want everyone racing under the same spotlight, bringing plenty of action for people coming to the track and interested parties. So again, between us, does that mean that they're going to get other sponsorship, other interest from media companies, production channels? There's going to be more money coming in, basically, is what I'm thinking that between the lines this could mean. So if more money's coming in, or they want to attract more investment, then they need to put this all together as this pyramid spectacle. So it's not just about Formula One, especially with the USA coming in as well, and them really getting behind now, behind the Formula One. To me, it's going to be a bigger showcase, a bigger spectacle. And it's going to have lots of sponsors, lots of money rolling in, because we know that there's issues with drivers' funding. We know there's issues with losing drivers because they can't afford to race in the sport. So there has to be an alternative, right? And what's the alternative so that these feeder series can continue to be successful? So to me, it's about a bigger picture. It's about bigger revenue. But how did Bruno Michel put it? He did admit there's too much time between the races, and I think it's very credible that he said that. But he mentioned about the stakeholders and the fans, drivers and the teams that have all said, about this season, and all of that has been taken into consideration, which is fabulous and fantastic that they're listening and they know what's best for these drivers and this sport. Speech over.
I like the idea that Stefano Domenicali has got a bit of a northern twang to him. He says, "Yeah, you know," at the start of his quotes. That's my favourite bit of, of all of that rant, LA. But I do agree with what you say. It kind of alludes to what I said with that they gave it a shot and they've listened to feedback, and the feedback wasn't overly positive. I don't know many people, even before the season started, who were particularly excited about the gaps between races, the tracks that we're going to, the 3 race per weekend format, which on one hand is great because you get more racing, but on the other hand, it's been a bit overwhelming sometimes. I actually preferred this weekend with Formula 2 and Formula 3 both having 2 races that I could actually keep up and remember what happened to a certain extent. You know, there's still a lot of racing to watch. So very welcome to go back to the more traditional format.
We can see why they did it. You know, the part of the explanation was because, you know, Bruno Michel said about the, you know, last year, the last 18 months and what's been happening around the world. And, you know, so it's understandable that there was some kind of change needed to try and attempt to bring costs down. And, you know, I'm not sure if that worked out as well as what they thought or they expected. But to me, I still feel that just that those two words I said, interested parties. So that's out of all the words those 3 gentlemen said in the press conference that they hosted, those 2 words stand way out for me. And I feel that this pyramid is going to be part of a very big, exciting entertainment product.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hope so. And as you say, we can't knock them for giving it a try, and we understand the reasons for it. This weekend has definitely been a bit of a insight as to what we're going to see moving forward next season, isn't it? And it's definitely been a little bit easier to follow, as you say, Jim. Timo, obviously from the driver's perspective, we're hopefully, well, are we going to see more 2022 Formula 2 drivers on the Formula 1 grid in 2023 as a result of the new format?
It would be nice, but at the moment, I'm not sure about it. I think going back to what LA just said, it's a bit. It depends on who these interested parties are and how much they get involved in and what level. Because again, again, watching F2 and F3, you see teams that are in both of those feeder series, and you think it'd be nice if at least one of them made a jump up to F1 and had an F1 team there, because they get 2 seats there. And again, with W Series, they're establishing their teams as well for next year, it looks like. So it'd be nice to try and see some big parties getting involved there as well. It'd be interesting to see how that develops. But yeah, I mean, we've touched on Pourchaire. He's pretty much guaranteed, I think, for 23, barring an awful season next year, which we're not at all predicting. But I've now cursed my real life, so apologies for that. But I think, as I was saying to you before we started this podcast, looking down the list of the 22 drivers earlier during the race and thinking who would be there realistically, and thinking there's about 7 or 8 who I could see going there. But again, good luck finding seats for all of them, because you'd have to clean house in F1 a lot. And even if you got rid of a few people who, if we're going to be really harsh about it, you'd think should go by the end of 22, you're still only getting rid of about 3 or 4 people. So you're still running out of space. So we need these interested parties to come in, and I think that's a big part of it. And if they keep listening to what the fans are saying and trying to build this F1 cinematic universe, if you will, then we can get more of them. I just don't know if 23 is viable. Maybe 24, but again, it's just trying to see how quickly you can get things to move and how much. Again, the finance side of things, it's not a cheap sport. We all know this, so it really depends on how quickly they can get all that moving.
I kind of feel, as something we touched on before, I think that there's a big influence on winning the championship and not being able to repeat the year. And I'm wondering, not next season necessarily, because it's definitely not been announced, but would that be considered to be abolished? So then it doesn't come in as a factor that drivers are potentially thinking that they don't necessarily want to win this championship because they can't continue the year after if there's very limited seats in F1. I think it has to start from the front. I think F1 need more teams on the grid. I think we all feel that anyway. So there's more room for Formula 2 drivers to graduate, and then maybe at least get 3 or 4 graduates a year. But as well as that, not necessarily use it as this stepping stone. As such, it is a stepping stone, but to have it so that F2 isn't that exact stepping stone where when they win, they do have to move on no matter what, and have it as a in its own right, a series in its own right. So then they win and they can then repeat it again the year after. How good are they? Can they win it again?
I think it's right we say a series in its own right. That's actually quite key. I think it alludes to some of the conversation we've had earlier in this podcast with some of the drivers who, like Porsche, if he was to win and he can't do it next year and all this sort of stuff, it's Formula 2 will never, just by the nature of its name, never be the same level as Formula 1. But as we all know, watching it is bloody entertaining. And I don't necessarily feel that having a Piastri or Schwartzman or Zhou in the sport for 5 years, if they're going to be fighting at the front, should be perceived as a negative. If they can't find a seat for financial reasons, i.e. Ralph Boschung or something like that, but they can still race in Formula 2 and provide us entertainment, brilliant. I'd love to see Dan Ticktum racing in Formula 2 and watching him every race weekend. If we know he's not going to make it to Formula 1 for whatever reason, it doesn't necessarily mean he has to go out Formula 2. And unfortunately, that's the way that it's set up at the moment, but it doesn't have to be.
Well, it's interesting, follow that. I was thinking, because again, this rule in F2 at the moment, you've got to feel even more this year, especially for Nick de Vries, because again, wins F2, no space for him on the F1 grid, wins Formula E, still can't get on the bloody grid for next year. What does he have to do about it? And again, I don't know I can't remember if the rule is there for Formula 3 or not, but you can't stay if you win. You just generally choose not to because Formula 2 is available and there's more options there. But again, Chadwick won in 2019, nothing stopping her from coming back this year again. So again, it's like, we're not forcing it in the other two feeder series on the F1 weekend. Why are we doing it here? Because again, if you have a Schwartzman or a Nick de Vries where you know they're good and you're losing them, or Callum Ilott even, especially, and then it's like they all fully deserve a spot, even if they only last for a year in F1 for whatever reason, you still want to give them that opportunity, and we're just not getting that.
I can see it now. Ralph Boschung, a 5-time Formula 2 winner or champion, if you like. Can you see it? So, guys, that is all we have time for today. But before we go, let's take a look at the championship standings. Oscar Piastri extends his lead going into the final 2 rounds of the season. He has now put 36 points in between himself and his nearest rival. A big weekend in terms of the championship. The battle for second is well and truly on, just 22 points separating Guan Yu Zhou, Schwartzman, Ticktum, and Théo Pourchaire. Any one of those drivers, I think they can still have a shot at the title. So it's game on until the end of the season. And the team standings, Prema stretched their legs even further at the top of the championship, extending their gap to 88 points. They'll take some catching from there. Carlin have jumped UNI Virtuosi into second place in the stands after a pretty torrid weekend for the Norfolk-based outfit. Just 8 points scored all weekend long for them. High Tech and ART round out the top 5. So Jim, LA, Timo, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And thank you to you guys at home for watching as well. If you've enjoyed the show, please make sure you hit that like button. Let us know what you thought of the show in the comments section below. Subscribe for exclusive interviews, track guides, and of course, more of the F2 show. We have a 10-week gap now in between races, but keep an eye out for content on our social media channels for the meantime. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.